All right, so we finally reached the point in this section where we're going to talk about our 6 max open raising ranges. So let's go ahead and let's get into it. So before we look at the actual ranges, there's a few things we need to take a look at first. So what you see on this screen is open raising ranges tight to loose. What does that mean? Well, what it means is what you see here depicted on the right is that in early position, all the way to late position, what you'll notice is that the size of our ranges increases as we go from under the gun being all the way over here to our latest position, the button. So this is just an example, depicted ranges. Let's say that we're opening 10% in early position. By the time we get to late position, we're opening a much wider range. And this is a basic pre-flop strategy when it comes to open raising ranges. So there is a very important reason for this. And why are we opening such a small range here versus a much larger range here in late position? Well, the reason is positional disadvantage in early position, something that we talked about earlier in this course. So when we open raise under the gun or middle position, we're going to be at a positional disadvantage to everybody left to act pre-flop. And then on the flop, we're going to be at a positional disadvantage as well. But as we move closer to the button, there are going to be fewer people left to act. So we actually end up gaining positional advantage on our opponents that are going to be acting before us post-flop. And also on people that are going to be acting in the small blind and the big blind as well after us. So they may act after us pre-flop, but post-flop they're going to be at a positional disadvantage. So that's the biggest thing, is because we play so many rounds post-flop, right? We have pre-flop, that's one round, but then we have the flop, the turn, and the river. Well, whether you're in position or out of position really makes it either much easier or much harder to play the game, right? When we're at a positional disadvantage, it's going to be a lot harder to play good poker post-flop versus when we're at a positional advantage post-flop on the flop, the turn, and the river, it's going to be a lot easier for us. So for that reason, and actually I should have, but I didn't, I should have included a graph of my winnings to go hand in hand with this. But if you look at your winnings after you've been playing for quite some time and you have a decent win rate and you're a solid winning player, if you go back, let's say after you play 50,000 hands or 100,000 hands, if you go back to your Poker Tracker 4 or Holder Manager 2 database and you take a look at your winnings by position, what you're going to see in terms of the dollar sign amount is that you're going to win the most money on the button. And this is when variance is minimized. So in a short sample size, you're going to see it all over the place. But once you get to 50,000 or 100,000 hands, it's going to look something like this, where the least amount of money you make is going to be in early position. And in fact, in the blinds, in the small blind, in the big blind, we are expected and we should be losing money. The goal in regards to playing in the blinds, and we'll talk about this with blind defense, is not to win money in the long run. It's to minimize how much we lose. But by the time we get to under the gun, all the way to the button, we should be winning money. But we're going to be winning a lot more money in late position than we are in early position. And a lot of that has to do with positional advantage plus the ability to steal the blinds. So that's why we play a tight to loose range. Now let's talk about one more thing. So in regards to what I provide in this lecture for your open raising ranges, is I provide conservative ranges to keep you out of trouble. So this course is designed for somebody that isn't already a microstakes crusher. This course is designed for beginning and struggling poker players that want to become crushers and solid, good winning poker players at the microstakes and at the live low stakes or maybe even a home game. So for that reason, because this is my target market of students, I provide you conservative ranges to keep you out of trouble. And that's what you're going to see here. And these just aren't ranges that I pulled out of the sky. These are ranges that I've devised for my very own play over the years, as well as the coaches that I work with at Microgrinder Poker School, in addition to the students as well. So these ranges are based off of my Master Microstakes book, and I had two professional poker players edit the book for me. And I had numerous students, I believe around 7 to 10 of my students that had been taking my courses and also read several of my books for quite some time. I had them edit the book as well and provide their comments and feedback as well. So these ranges come from fellow students plus other poker coaches. And these have been profitable ranges for me. So I can guarantee if you learn everything that you need to in this course, these are going to be profitable ranges for you. Now, one thing in regards to this, and it looks like I have a little bit of a typo, this T needs to be down here. So let me just go ahead and write in AT. So these ranges are designed specifically for 100 big blind effective stack sizes. I know I talked about this before, but in regards to your buy-in, let's say it's a 5NL game, then you should be buying in for $5, which would be 100 big blinds. If it's a 10NL game, you should be buying in for $10, meaning that's 100 big blind effective stack sizes. So these ranges are not for playing short stack play, such as a 30 big blind buying game. These are designed for 100 big blind buying games. Okay, so in regards to these conservative ranges, you may find that if you go out to YouTube or if you go to other training poker sites, or if you read other poker coaches' books or so forth, you may find that a lot of coaches are going to be recommending and suggesting that you open raise much wider ranges than I recommend in this course. And there's a reason that they do this. The reason is that they want you to make the most profitable long-term play for every single hand, meaning the most plus expected value play. So they see a hand that I see as potentially a hand that's going to get you in trouble, as a hand that from their perspective, if they played it, if they folded it, then they're going to lose more than if they played it. So it may be very marginally profitable for them. So they want you as their students to play these ranges as well. But there's an issue with this, is that if you're going to be playing a much wider range of hands, particularly more marginal hands, then you better be able to play those hands well post-flop. And if you're not able to play those marginal hands well post-flop, then you're probably going to end up losing a lot more than if you didn't play them to begin with. Now, it's one thing for a poker coach to play these ranges, but it's an entirely different thing for you as a student to play these ranges if you haven't reached to the point where you're already a good poker player. And I've seen this on other poker training sites. I'm not going to name out names, but I've seen it with students and students saying that, look, I play these ranges, but they're not profitable for me. Well, there's a reason, because you're not ready to play those ranges. So really, when you're playing too wide of ranges too early on in the game, they really do harm your game, and they harm your game in more than one way. It's going to harm your progression in the game in regards to moving up, because your win rate's going to be lower, and it's also going to harm your mental game and your confidence as well. So here's my recommendation. Start with these provided conservative ranges, and then as you improve, begin to slowly widen your ranges if you feel like you can start widening your range, and play those wider ranges profitably as well. So again, just a progression in your game would mean a progression in widening your ranges as well. Okay, so with all that said, let's take a look at the ranges. And we're not going to spend forever talking about every specific range and breaking them down. But what you're going to notice is that the ranges are going to be a lot smaller in early position. And by the time we get to the button, it's going to be the widest. So we're going to start off looking at under the gun, and my recommendation for you is to start off with a 9.8% open raising range. And here it is, you see it on the screen. Now, here's the thing. If you don't feel comfortable open raising all these hands that you see here, you can even make it smaller. It's perfectly fine. Let's say that you don't want to open a hand such as Ace 10 suited. And let me actually do this. Let me get my line tool out in a different color. Let me change this to red to cross it out. So you can go ahead and take this out. I have no problem with you doing that. Let's say that you don't want to open pocket sixes because you find that if you open pocket sixes under the gun as open raise, you rarely win. Then that's perfectly fine. Just fold them. So I don't mind you taking a look at these ranges and taking things out. And then also, if you want to add a few things in that you think that you can play profitably. So let's say that you want to add in a hand such as Queen Jack suited, or maybe you want to add in pocket fives or even pocket fours, then do that as well. So everybody's going to be at a different level because I have thousands of students taking my poker courses, and not everybody is going to be at that same level. So you can tweak these ranges as need be. So, but for beginners and people that are struggling and losing, I would recommend not adding in ranges. But if you're somebody that's already has a marginal win rate, but you want to bump it up a bit more, go ahead and tweak these ranges and start adding in a few more here and there right now. But with that said, so that's our under the gun range. You're going to notice that I don't recommend opening deuces through fives. There's a reason. And you can even take sixes out of here. The problem is that when you open these in early position, is that a majority of the time the flop is going to have a card that's higher than your deuces through fives or deuces through sixes. And so what we're essentially trying to do is we're trying to flop a three of a kind. And the proper terminology is trying to flop a set, but we're not going to flop a set that often. So we're going to open three big blinds and we're just going to be folding to any sort of post flop aggression. And then of course, we have a lot of our high card, our Broadway hands. And we do have Jack 10 suited in here. A lot of people wonder why I have this in here. And I don't have Queen Jack suited in a hand like Queen Jack off, King Jack off, and Queen 10 suited. I look at this hand. I look at Queen or Jack 10 suited as an implied odds type of hand. And why do I like this hand so much? Well, in regards to the straight, it always makes the nut straight. And in regards to the flush, it makes a very strong flush. It flops lots of great draws. It can win with top pair. And also, if we flop top pair, because our kicker isn't that great, we can easily get away from it. If we have a hand like Queen Jack suited, if we flop top pair jacks, and then it's a lot harder to get away from that. But we're often gonna lose to King Jack or Ace Jack. So that's why I have that in there. All right, so that's under the gun. Middle position, the ranges just open up a little bit more from that 9.8 to 12.67%. You notice we're down to pocket fives. We have 10-9 suited. I believe ace 10 suited off. Ace 10 off, ace 9 suited, king 10 suited, queen 10 suited. So also with these ranges here, we're going to start adding in more suited hands that are weaker and leave out the off suited at first. The reason why is, well, these can only make straight draws and straights. And these hands can make straight draws, straights, flush draws, and strong flushes. So we want to start adding in those suited hands quicker or sooner than the off suited hands. Then by the time we get to the cutoff position, our ranges vastly increase. Why? Because the only person left in position post flop is going to be button. Yes, the blinds are still left to act, but they're going to be out of position post flop. So pre flop, button is the only person that's going to be in position to us. So we go from, and let's go back once, we go from this 12.67% all the way up to 22.17%. So pretty wide. Now, not all of you are going to feel comfortable opening this wide from the cutoff. That's perfectly fine. Like I said before, take hands out of here that you're not comfortable playing. So like I said, maybe you don't want to open up 8-6 suited, or maybe you don't want to open up 10-8 suited, 9-7 suited, any of these suited one gappers. And I call these a suited one gapper because there's a gap. So this is a suited connector because they're connected. These ones have a gap, so they're a suited one gapper. And maybe you don't want to open up 7-6 suited. Maybe you don't want to open up all the weak suited aces or ace 9 offsuit or pocket deuces. That's perfectly fine. Start taking some of them out. But we should be opening and widening our range quite a bit by the time we get to the cutoff, because this is our first stealing position to steal the small blind and the big blind's blinds. And then finally, in regards to the position that's going to have the most optimal post-flop position, and that's the button position. Now we go from 22.17% all the way up to 35.44%. pretty darn wide, and this actually isn't that wide. If you look at a lot of other poker training sites and other poker coaches' recommendations, people are recommending upwards of 45 or 50% opening range, even at the micro stakes, but I don't recommend that for the reasons I said earlier in the video. And this may actually look a bit too wide for some of you. So like I said, if you want to cut out some of the weaker hands in here, go ahead and cut it out. Maybe you want to just bring it down to maybe like 32, 31% or 30%. And that's perfectly fine. I'd rather you play a more conservative range to start, and then as you improve, widen it up, than vice versa. Start off too wide and end up losing a lot of money post-flop because you're just not good enough yet to play those ranges. All right, so there is one more, and that's the small blind. So the last person that can raise with nobody else raising is a small blind, because by the time it gets to the big blind, if nobody's opened, then they've folded. So if we think about that, right, you can't be the first person to open raise in the big blind. Yes, small blind could complete, but that really wouldn't be considered an open raise. And so we're not going to include the big blind in here. But you're going to notice with the small blind, it's at 22.17%. It's actually the exact same range as the cutoff range. So you're probably wondering, well, why did we go wider with the button and then decrease our sizing a bit in the small blind? Well, there's an important reason. The small blind has the worst position post flop. So let's say that under the gun limped, and let's say that middle position folded, cutoff folded, button limped, and small blind decides to raise. Well, they take an initiative, but now they're out of position to two players post flop. So for this reason, let's say that everybody folds, and it's even just the small blind versus the big blind. Well, the small blind is going to be out of position to the big blind. And in fact, if it is a small blind open raising range, it has folded around to the small blind. So it's going to be blind versus blind. And again, we're going to talk about this in Stealing the Blinds in our blind defense lectures. But I just want to preface this now by telling you that because small blind is out of position post flop, that's why the size of the ranges start to decrease compared to the button range. Now, if the small blind wasn't at a positional disadvantage, and let's say there was an additional position in position that's going to be in position post flop, then of course we'd want to increase the ranges a bit more. But because small blind is forced to play against the big blind when the big blind calls post flop out of position to them at a positional disadvantage, we want to decrease the ranges ever so slightly, but these are still pretty wide ranges because it's going to be a heads up situation, a blind versus a blind battle. So anyways, that's all of our ranges. My recommendation is to print this out, print the provided PDF out, and have this as a study resource or as just kind of like a desk guide for you as you start to play. What we are going to do in the next lecture is I'm going to show you how to input this into Equilab, which you can use if you're on a PC. If you're on a Mac, there is no Equilab. So unfortunately, you can't use that unless you install a Windows operating system as a virtual machine on that, which can be a bit cumbersome. It's almost actually better just to have these printed out on a sheet of paper or several sheets of paper. And in fact, what I typically have done in the past is I'll take the ranges and I'll put a table together on a single sheet of paper. I'll put it in landscape mode. I'll put 2 rows and I'll put them all together on there, and that allows me to mark it up over time and tweak the ranges and kind of X things out and add things in per my particular needs as I'm evolving my game. And that's what I did when I started off getting back into the game and I was tweaking my ranges. That's what I would do. It's much easier to look at that and tweak it than to have to go into Equilab and do it. But we are going to demonstrate Equilab. So if you have any questions about the opening ranges, please let me know. If not, thanks for watching. In the next video, we're going to do a live demonstration of how to input these ranges into Equilab.